Hi there. I think we are live. Facebook updated their little live approach or program, so I think it is working. I'm gonna wait for a minute and get some confirmation. It says it's live, but I can't see anything else with it, so we'll see. It looks good. I'm seeing perfect is coming up. So welcome. What is today? It's June. It is Wednesday, June 10th. And if that wasn't on my computer, I would have had no clue that today was a Wednesday or that it's already June 10th. That's a little crazy and insane right there. So my name is Tricia Broderick. I'm with Agile for All, and we've been doing these live streams every couple weeks, every other week, and really just kind of pick different topics as I go. This one actually came up because for a couple of different reasons. One, I want to recognize the insanity of the world right now in terms of what we've been actively dealing with in terms of COVID, but also what has been going on for a really long term in terms of racial injustice and what we need to be doing a better job to support, especially our Black community, but all underrepresented in minority groups. And so there's a little bit of everybody being really mentally and emotionally kind of right on the brink at all times right now. And I had a first experience recently of not being able to finish a speaking session and a conference session. That's never ever happened to me. And because I've been so on the brink and trying to do mental, physical, and emotional labor work, I could have handled it in 1,000 different ways when it went off the rails. So first, let me describe what happened, and then and I'll also a little bit then why I ended up choosing to do it and what some tips and tricks to do with it. So last week, I think that's correct. Last week was the Agile Virtual Summit put on, hosted by Adam Weisbart. And he had a number of us speaking at it. And it was a 5-day virtual event with, I think, 3 to 4 speakers every single day. And the size just grew and grew and grew. And so Adam actually reached out to different speakers, and especially because I was on Monday, said, hey, if you want to record your session, we'll do the live Q&A, but it might minimize some risk of not being able, if you have any technical difficulties, at least we can get the session out. So I was all down for it. I recorded the session, got everything over to them. I watched Jim Benson, who did his session right before. There was a couple little glitches in the stream, but for the most part, it went pretty well. And then my turn. And so they started playing the video. And I'm watching, totally watching what's happening on the video. I'm kind of tracking along behind it. And then all of a sudden it started kind of lagging and things. And I do hope that Adam almost released the behind the scenes version of what was going on behind the scenes, because we were like, what's going on? What should we do? Is it the video? Let's just switch it. So after it did it a couple of times, we decided to try and just switch it to live. I brought up exactly where it was in the slide deck, started going exactly from that point, which in my head seemed easier than what it actually was in that moment, but I still did it. It still worked. And then, but then it got to a place where I could get maybe 5 words out, and Adam would have to come in. Well, it's down again. And you do that enough time, and I don't care who you are, you're frazzled. It's really hard to then keep going with the conversation and what you're trying to share and especially because my topic was super vulnerable, super personal, but I kept trying, and eventually his internet just went. It was just done. And here is somebody, Adam had gotten, he had generators, he had backups for backups. He really went out of his, above and beyond, out of his way to try and account for all these contingencies. And at the end of the day, it went down. And I'm not going to pretend I was super sad, even immediately really struggling with it, because I was we were right in a really key point of the message, and I'm not going to get to finish it, and it's just still down, and and I'm stressing, I'm upset, I feel my phone's going off, and I'm texting people, and I'm trying not to be mad, because at the end of the day, though, right now, Adam's stressing. We're both completely stressing out about this. And we're dealing with things behind the scenes, and I just feel like I've let everybody down. He feels like he's let everybody down, which, granted, these are expectations we put on ourselves, but this is a reality for me. I've never not been able to finish a session before. And eventually it does come back up. And right before we decide to try and still go live. Now, from a timing perspective, my session time ended I think it was 30 minutes earlier. It was done. But we needed to get it up and test it for the next speaker that was going to be coming on. And so Adam's like, what do we do? We're kind of like, well, what should we do? And we just did what we thought kind of was natural and what we just did. And we got online and we responded. And the reason I'm sharing all of this and why I'm going to do this topic in particular is because the response to how we responded was a little bit overwhelming. I mean, we thought we were a hot mess to a certain degree. And the response from everybody else was, oh my gosh, you handled that so well. It was, with grace in class. And no part of me felt graceful. I felt horrible. And so it made me kind of stop and think about other times when things have gone off the rails. What is it that just seems to be a little bit more natural that I'm not honestly thinking about, but in reality, maybe I have in the past and it just now feels natural, and how we kind of try to approach it. So I'm gonna go meta on it and talk through it, and what we did. So we actually owned it to each other a little bit beforehand, before we did go live, of just okay, we could come back and nobody's there, right? We could come back and everybody's gonna be mad. What do we want to do? And we kind of summarized it as let's own it. Let's banter. Let's engage with this and see what happens. And so when we did go back live, we were really transparent of we weren't just transparent of something happened. Clearly everybody knew something happened. There's no hiding that something happened. The live stream was done. It was gone, right? But we were also transparent about just the impact that it was having us. I think at one point I was like, I'm sweating, I'm dying here. I've sweated so much. And I was like, me too. But if you're just transparent in the sense of not just what happened, but the impact that it has on attendees, on us, on what we were trying to do, people, what I get a sense from is that there's this element of people feeling like you're being authentic and being honest about it, and hence making you more human, which makes it a little less judgy from people in terms of what you're doing. Is we're trying to get back on here. And the second thing on top of transparency is humor. And so we were adding in humor of is there really anybody even watching here? Is there somebody here? I think at one point I offered to gift out stickers or something, but I also went and I got a bottle of wine and I filled my glass and I poured what I believe is a natural, normal size drink. I have since been told it was a generous pour. But I had the wine, and there's benefits to being virtual sometimes, and I was right there at home and doing that, to where I could kind of joke and hey, I'm drinking now. And so not only could I be transparent about this stinks, this wasn't an enjoyable thing to not be able to finish, but I could inject some humor with it. And both Adam and I, cracking up and laughing at one point, and the humor kind of releases some of that adrenaline too. It's the same thing as movement, and just being able to kind of, what can you do but laugh sometimes, because for all the planning we did, for all the good intent we had, it completely went off the rails, and that's going to happen. That's going to be the case at times. And so how do we be transparent, but also how do we laugh through it? Because learning is hard and failure is not great. And I'm not saying laugh and just blow it off, but laugh and look at the full picture of it, and see what else is possible and what else can kind of form in a moment that might seem like nothing good can come of it. And so if you've got some transparency, you got some humor, also take ownership, right? It's and I'm going to separate that one out just even from transparency, because it's one thing to say, hey, this is what happened, but to say, I'm sorry, you know, and that seems really simple, but there's truth to it. And I had so many people on LinkedIn and stuff saying, why are you apologizing? It's not a big deal. You know, it's not your fault. And it's like, but I am sorry. We had a desire to do something. We had a plan to do something, and it wasn't able to happen. And I am sorry for that. And owning that isn't bad. Now, if I dwell on it, trying to like make everybody say things like, "Oh, it's not your fault," like that's a totally different story. But for us to just own it and say, yeah, this is what happened, and this isn't what we wanted, and we're really sorry. And fingers crossed that the next session stays live and everything goes well for that, because that's what we really want. But in a lot of ways, that ownership, just that immediate like acknowledgement of it, demonstrates your investment in this as well, that it was a big deal for you, that it was important to you, that their time and their investment, their relationship to you is important. And we need to be doing more of that, especially with everything going on right now, is how do we acknowledge the impact to somebody else, regardless of your intent, and own that impact, and to say, I'm sorry. And then that leads into the fourth thing. So there's transparency, there's ownership, there's humor. And the fourth thing is have alternatives. Originally, the plan for the most part was going to be, if you did a free pass with the Agile Virtual Summit, you could see the live streams, and you had to upgrade in order to see a recorded. And when this went off the rails, down a cliff, you know, Adam and I were immediately brainstorming. I think it was Adam that came up with the idea of like, well, let's just, you know, we've got the recording. Luckily, I had, you know, recorded in advance that he was like, let's release that immediately for everybody, you know, everybody, not just the people that had upgraded. So having these alternatives, having something that demonstrates not only is this not what we wanted, but we're going to pivot. We're going to change the plan. We're going to approach it differently. That really brings back kind of that fairness to the negative impact that people were experiencing. And so he immediately had that alternative. And then he didn't just do it for my session. He actually kept that going for all of the sessions, and looked at it as a potential for an opportunity in different ways for different people. And so, you know, him coming back online just going, sorry, or even, you know, things happen. Even if he had owned it and been transparent about it, there was still a sense of loss. That I felt a sense of loss, other people felt a sense of loss. He felt a sense of loss in terms of just not being able to deliver in the full scheme of what was looking for. So having those alternatives, he even also, you know, said, hey, Tricia, are you willing to do an extra Q&A session? We can figure out what time, we can do all of that later, but we can at least let people know that not only can they get the recording, but we'll also do an extra Q&A. And, you know, mad respect for that, to adjust in a way that actually added even more value for the conference as a whole. And so when we think about how do we want to be in those moments, and I start thinking about this, and people were like, oh, it was so graceful, it was funny, it was awesome. And I'm like, well, are those four things the same things that I do in different situations? And sure enough, you know, I think back to Agile 2017 when the computer froze and I'm clicking and nothing's moving, and I'm still trying to talk and nothing's moving. And I eventually just kind of was transparent. I'm like, I have failed. I need people like being transparent. Can you set the slides back to the beginning? Because at the point when they went to the backup machine, the slides had, because I was clicking, the backup machine, the slides were at the end, and I was still right at the beginning. So I needed to reset that. So I owned it, and then I turned it into like an alternative of like, well, let's teach everybody here at the conference what is known as a failure bow. I have failed, and I bowed in front of everybody. And I always laughed because that was one of the biggest things that people still will comment to me about for that conference. Like, oh, you did the failure bow, or I learned the failure bow from that. And I did not create the failure bow. I actually don't even know where the source of that is. So I apologize. I can't even source where the failure bow comes from. But I actually am experiencing that same thing. So I was transparent. I had humor. I took ownership. And then, you know, in this case, we didn't need an alternative because we could just reset right there in the moment. But the same result happened. I can't even count how many photos I got of screenshots of me and Adam with wine in my face, Adam laughing. When Comcast called Adam, apparently I was like, and so many people took screenshots of that and sent those to me. And it became kind of part of the memory of the event and part of the situation, because even later when there was a blip in the recordings, I'm like, no tackling gremlins, I took them all, right? And it kind of ended up being part of the event. And I still don't know if I'd call it graceful with grace in class. I think, but I do think that we just came at it from that perspective of, let's be transparent, let's have humor, let's take ownership, and what else can we do to meet the needs of what we were trying to accomplish together. And now I'm not pretending that, you know, it was super easy right there in the moment. Like I mentioned, we were, if we did do a behind the scenes, there is most likely going to have to be several bleeps done in there and all sorts of things that were happening behind the scenes. And afterwards, you know, I did finish more of that wine, and I did have to, you know, release to a few friends and what that meant. But I find that when the things go off the rails, if you do that versus just try and ignore it, you don't want to try and just ignore it because it's obvious it's happening or something's happening, even if it wasn't as obvious as in this scenario. And you want to not break trust with people. And so trying to ignore it or pretend it didn't happen ultimately will break some trust in whether or not people feel like you're lying and, you know, and not being as straightforward as you could be. You know, as hard as it is in that moment, don't feel this total like, oh, this is hopeless. And, you know, I have no issues with crying in front of people. I have done it multiple times. But in those moments, that's not really what other people need from you if it's happening to you right in that moment. Because in some ways, then that becomes like a pity towards you and a more worried about you situation, and which can actually make it worse. Like the more people worried about me, the more I'm like, no, but I'm sad for you. Like this is, and you get in a bad spiral. So there's time and place for kind of the, oh, that sucked. And having that kind of moment. But right there, people want to see you lead by example in terms of things are going to go off the rails. I don't care what you plan. I don't care what kinds of risk strategies you have. Things will go off the rails, and how you respond influences how other people feel about the event in the moment it's going off the rails, but also influences how they proceed forward. And because, you know, when I think about it, it's like, I don't think I ever consciously thought through these things, which is why I wanted to share them today. But if I stop and I think about where did I get it from? Where did I learn to do that, even if it was subconsciously in some ways? And I think about other instances where something's completely gone off the rails, and I go, I like how they handle it. I would be freaking out if that was me. But wow, they seem like they're just going to roll with it and go. And so when I stopped to think about those influences, I very much got that from others. And I just never really thought it through and was conscious about, hey, these are the things I'm taking in and want to bring to this moment. So I thought maybe others can learn from my pain a little last week in terms of it going off the rails and how you want to respond in that moment, especially as a leader, especially as somebody that is trying to share information, trying to help others. Sometimes how you behave, how you act, how you respond could be the biggest sharing that you could give. And that was a reminder to me this last week, is like, my session aside, how I am when I'm speaking, how I am when things go off the rails is just as much about sharing as the content itself sometimes. So we got a little bit of time for questions as we go into this. And let me see what we have, and I'll hold for a second. I gotta look down on my phone to be able to see, because I only can see one screen on mine. I don't have the cool setups as everybody else does when they've got when they're doing it. Okay. Well, okay. Okay, so let's I'll do this one. And that's I won't use the exact wording because there's some wording in there. But if I do find that I'm in those areas where I've just completely if you find yourself where you're crying, you've lost it. It's just, you've broken. That happens, and it's okay. In the situations where you can control it, that's gonna be helpful. But I've broken. I've seen other people break. It does happen. Oftentimes, it's not this one particular incident that's making you break. It's usually like a combination of things, and eventually something and one more thing goes, and now you're just done. Like, there's just nothing else left. And so I guess my advice in those situations is, if you know that you're kind of building for that, make sure you have some support nearby for when that does happen, because it is likely to happen. And so if you know that things have been going off the rails several times in a row, and you feel yourself like getting more and more upset every time, and you haven't been able to release, try and make sure someone knows that that's building for you, what's going to be your avenue. I had an outlet once that says, if I text you, come find me and like, go help me hide for a second. And so that you can release it and those things. If you can't do that, and one time the one thing goes off the rails and it just is so significant, and you feel all those emotions come up and it just releases, it's okay. In some ways also, you're being vulnerable, you're sharing, you're being authentic. And will there be some people that give some comments about that? Sure. You're going to get way more comments about being human and people respecting the fact that, and acknowledging how much passion and how much you cared about this, that was a legitimate emotional reaction you had when it went off the rails. The trick is, though, if you're still leading, you can't stay there, because then the attention is on you. And you really want to be getting to a place where you can, in some form or fashion, moving it forward. And that's where, again, having help, having others be able to go forward. In some ways, I actually feel like Adam and I handled it better because we were together and because we could play off of each other than if it had been just one of us. And so that's really a beneficial dynamic, that if you do find that you break, the world's not going to come to an end, and release it, and then get to that, what's the alternatives, what's the humor, what's the transparency and ownership that you can find from it. Okay. Let's see if we've got any more. Humor. So humor's tough. Yes, you do. Humor can go bad too. Like, you have to be aware of, this isn't just, oh, let me tell a joke, and you do not want to be doing inappropriate jokes or anything that's not there. So if you find that when you are, rattled and humor's tough for you, again, that might be where somebody else can help you a little bit. But but be just genuine about it, right? Even in some cases, you don't have to crack a joke. You don't actually have to um, be funny. Just smile, right? Just laugh. Even just going, what can you do? And laugh. That's still just bringing a different energy into the situation, not a haha, I'm gonna tell a joke because this is this is how we're all gonna pretend like this didn't happen. No, I tend to, humor does tend to come to me a little bit naturally and easily in kind of stressful situations. Uh, and if that's not the case for you, just even that, just taking a moment and going, well, that was different and not what we expected, and laugh for a second and just kind of let that energy, let that moment sit like that for a second is still humor. It doesn't have to be a lineup of jokes and a really, funny delivery of things. Because sometimes just having that moment where other people realize that you're not going to break and you're willing to kind of laugh about this, they may insert the humor too. And they may actually highlight what is happening. And a silly example of that is even just Adam kept talking, but he was on mute, and so the people in the chat made a kind of a joking game out of it, and so other people will sometimes help you with the humor too, as long as they know that you're willing to laugh. And so any kind of way that's genuine and authentic for you and demonstrating that is what I'm talking about with humor. So hopefully this was helpful for you, and thinking about how do we want to respond when things go off the rails. Again, think about how you can be transparent, take ownership, insert some humor, and come up with some alternatives to address whatever it was you were trying to do that went off a cliff and down the ravine. So in the meantime, what do we have coming up? I personally have and I did a little bit better this time and wrote down things. I have an advanced CSM, which is really focused on facilitation, in July coming up. It is almost full, so if you are interested, take a peek at that. We have daily doses coming out on a regular basis. And I am also going to be doing a live stream with Lizzie Morris tomorrow, I think, but I don't have a lot of details on that yet as to where I'll be or how I will be doing it. But hopefully, we're going to be talking. We're going to start kind of talking a little bit about different biases and defense mechanisms as people are having conversations, and we're going to get to do that together, and we're kind of exploring and figuring that out. But the first one we're going to experiment with is tomorrow. Once I have some information, maybe we'll put that into the comments as to where people can see that. So in the meantime, keep learning, keep sharing, keep talking, and take care.